I'm Barbara Mitchell, and I genuinely believed family drama meant passive-aggressive remarks about whose potato salad was better at Christmas, or perhaps the occasional tiff over who forgot to take the bins out. You know, normal people problems. Nothing remotely resembling the absolute car crash I'm about to describe. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your offspring plots your demise. Right, where was I? Oh yes, my daughter's 18th birthday party. California Park. Barbecues sizzling, that forced laughter people do when they're pretending to enjoy family gatherings. All perfectly mediocre. Exactly as one would hope for a milestone birthday celebration. Then my daughter let out a scream that could have shattered wine glasses in a 3-mile radius, emanating from the changing tent like something out of a particularly vindictive horror film. I bolted inside. Heart doing that annoying pounding thing hearts do when they're convinced you're about to die, and stopped absolutely dead. Her long dark hair, that glorious mane she'd spent 18 years cultivating, was strewn across the ground like some macabre art installation. Her scalp was bare, glinting in the dim light with all the subtlety of a newly polished floor. She was sobbing, naturally, hands clutching her face, whilst my sister stood there in her ridiculous floral dress, smirking. Actually smirking. With clippers buzzing softly on a nearby table like some demented hairdresser's soundtrack to chaos. "What the hell did you do?" I demanded, my voice doing that trembling with rage thing that never sounds quite as intimidating as one hopes. She laughed. Of course she bloody laughed. That smug little chuckle she's perfected over the years, the one she deploys whenever she needs to dodge accountability for yet another disaster. "It's just a joke, sis. She'll laugh it off soon." Spoiler alert, she would not in fact laugh it off soon. My hand flew before my brain could engage in any meaningful negotiations. Echoing. Tremendously satisfying if I'm honest. I grabbed my daughter's arm, dragging her past gaping relatives who were treating this like free entertainment, which to be fair it absolutely was, and stormed towards the car. Mum's voice cut through the chaos like a particularly vindictive knife. "Bastard child. You always stir up trouble. Bastard child. How delightfully medieval. How wonderfully dramatic. How spectacularly unhelpful in this precise moment." I didn't look back because looking back would have required acknowledging the absolute circus I'd just exited, and frankly, I wasn't prepared for that level of self-reflection. The next morning, Mum appeared at my door. Eyes swollen, looking like she'd auditioned for a tragic Shakespearean role. Voice barely a whisper. "Please give your sister a way to live." That moment, my dear viewers, unraveled a secret that would tear our family apart with all the efficiency of a particularly aggressive cheese grater. If you've ever faced a family betrayal that flipped your world upside down, backwards and inside out, hit like and subscribe for raw, gripping stories like this. Share your own drama in the comments below, so we can all feel better about our comparatively functional disasters. I felt fury surge through me like an exceptionally angry wave at a beach that definitely didn't consent to being metaphorically involved in my emotional turmoil. "Get out!" I snapped, slamming the door in her face with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. Her words hung in the air like particularly persistent moths, but they only fueled my resolve. No more giving in. No more being the family doormat. No more pretending everything was fine when it categorically wasn't. My mind reeled back to the party chaos, that tent flap still flapping in my memory like some sort of traumatic flag. After the slap, which again tremendously satisfying, my sister clutched her cheek, eyes wide with what I can only describe as theatrical shock. "I had to stop her from going to the after party," she murmured, glancing at my daughter, who was huddled in the corner looking precisely as traumatized as one would expect after an involuntary impromptu haircut. I stepped closer, breath doing that hot, angry thing. "Stop her from what, exactly?" I hissed, channeling every ounce of maternal rage I could muster. She fumbled for her phone, hands trembling, very dramatic, and thrust it forward. Photos filled the screen. Marks on my daughter's arms. Bruised impressions from fingers gripping too tight, others on her ribs. hidden spots where clothes covered the damage. The kind of evidence that makes your stomach drop into your shoes and keep going until it reaches the center of the earth. That boyfriend of hers, my sister explained, voice dropping to what I suppose she considered a serious tone. I caught him roughing her up behind the school gym last week. He's been doing this for months. Because apparently, we're all living in some sort of twisted reality where assault is just a hobby teenage boys pursue between revision sessions and football practice. I scrolled through the images, a chill spreading in my gut like ice water someone maliciously poured down my spine. My daughter looked up, her face pale as fresh printer paper, and nodded slowly. "It's true, Mum," she whispered, fresh tears spilling with all the efficiency of a broken tap. My husband burst in then, his frame rigid, muscles coiled like springs someone wound far too tightly. He took the phone from me, his expression darkening as he surveyed the marks with all the joy of someone discovering their house has been infested with particularly aggressive termites. "How long?" he growled, turning to our daughter, his voice cracking with barely contained anger that was desperately trying to remain contained and failing spectacularly. She shrank back, wiping her face. "Since spring," she admitted, words barely audible, as though saying them quietly would somehow make them less horrifying. "Boiler, it didn't." He paced the tent floor, fists clenched, then knelt beside her. "Why hide it?" he asked, softer now, though his body stayed tense enough to snap. "Why not tell us?" She shrugged, staring at the ground like it might offer some useful answers. "He said I'd lose everything if I told." The confession hit like a punch to every parent's worst nightmare. We'd missed the signs. We'd failed spectacularly at noticing our daughter was being systematically abused. But my sister, with her questionable methods and apparent fondness for dramatic interventions, hadn't. I pocketed the phone, knowing this was merely the beginning of what promised to be an absolute odyssey of awfulness. That evening Tyler, because of course his name was Tyler, pounded on our front door like he owned the place. Like he had every right to demand answers from us. I opened it a crack, seeing his face twisted in anger under the porch light, looking precisely as entitled as I'd imagined. He demanded to know why Amber wasn't answering his calls. As though ghosting your abusive boyfriend requires a detailed explanation and formal apology. I blocked the doorway, telling him to leave before things got considerably worse, which seemed like generous advice given the circumstances. Tyler pushed forward, because boundaries are merely suggestions apparently, yelling that Cynthia was lying about everything. He claimed the bruises were from a fall during a hike last week. Nothing to do with him. Hiking accident. How wonderfully convenient. How spectacularly unbelievable. Amber peeked from the hallway, her voice shaking as she told him to go, but Tyler ignored her. Because respecting a woman's wishes is apparently optional when you're a teenage sociopath with control issues. Anthony came downstairs, jaw set tight enough to crack walnuts. He stood beside me, warning Tyler to back off with all the measured calm of someone trying desperately not to commit violence. Tyler laughed. Actually laughed. Then pulled out his phone with a flourish that suggested he'd been saving this moment for maximum dramatic impact. He mentioned that day at the school car park 2 weeks ago. Anthony's face drained of color faster than a particularly efficient bathtub drain. I asked what he meant, though part of me desperately didn't want to know. Anthony admitted he'd seen a mark on Amber's neck during dinner and confronted Tyler after class. He'd grabbed Tyler's collar against his car, threatening to end him if he laid a hand on Amber again. Understandable, really. Ill-advised legally, but understandable. Tyler had recorded the whole thing secretly. 'Cause of course he had. Because we're apparently living in a surveillance state where teenage abusers moonlight as amateur documentary filmmakers. He played a snippet, the audio clear, with Anthony's voice growling the threat with all the menace of someone who genuinely meant it. Tyler waved the phone triumphantly, saying his dad would bury us in court if we kept this up. His dad. A lawyer, naturally. Because this situation wasn't quite dystopian enough without adding legal threats to the mix. I felt my temper flare like a particularly aggressive gas ring, but kept calm. Years of dealing with difficult parents at school had trained me for moments precisely like this. I asked Amber if Tyler had ever recorded her too. She nodded, whispering about times he'd filmed arguments to twist later. Manipulative and technologically savvy. What a winning combination. Tyler snapped at her to shut up, calling her dramatic. That pushed me over the edge I'd been teetering on since he'd arrived. I grabbed my own phone, starting to record him right there. Fight fire with fire, as they say. Fight surveillance with surveillance. Tyler lunged for it, because assault is apparently his default response to everything. But Anthony stepped between us, shoving him back with considerably more restraint than I would have managed. Tyler stumbled, cursing. He threatened to call the police on Anthony for assault. Again. As though he hadn't just assaulted me seconds earlier. But logic and self-awareness have never been particularly strong companions. I told him to try it. That we had proof of his real crimes. Actual evidence of actual abuse. As opposed to his flimsy hiking story that wouldn't convince a particularly gullible toddler. Tyler's eyes narrowed with all the malevolence of a cartoon villain. He said no one would believe Amber over him. His family had connections in Albuquerque. Connections. How wonderfully corrupt. How spectacularly American. He mocked Cynthia as a jealous aunt, meddling in things she didn't understand. Because shaving someone's head is definitely the work of someone who doesn't understand abuse dynamics. Amber started crying, begging him to stop with a desperation that broke my heart into approximately 17 million pieces. Tyler softened his tone, classic abuser move, trying to pull her aside. He whispered promises to fix everything if she'd just come with him. If she'd just give him another chance. If she'd just continue being his punching bag. I yanked her back, slamming the door in his face with enough force to rattle the frame. But Tyler didn't leave, because boundaries remain merely decorative suggestions. He banged on the window, yelling that we'd regret this. Neighbors' lights flicked on like some sort of suburban lighthouse display. Aaron, our neighbor who runs a flower shop and apparently monitors all local drama, must have heard the commotion. Tyler finally stormed to his truck, tires screeching as he sped off into the desert night with all the melodrama of a teenager who believes he's the protagonist in his own personal action film. Inside, Anthony paced the kitchen, admitting he'd messed up by not telling me about the confrontation. He worried the video would make him look like the aggressor, which, to be fair, was a legitimate concern in our delightfully broken legal system. I hugged him, saying we'd face it together. Because that's what functional couples do. They face spectacularly awful situations together whilst pretending they have any idea what they're doing. Amber sat at the table, hands clasped tight enough to cut off circulation. She revealed Tyler had used similar threats before to keep her quiet about the pushes and grabs. Systematic abuse. Recorded manipulation. Legal threats. What a catch. I noted everything down, adding to our rapidly expanding file. Anthony suggested locking the doors extra tight tonight, which seemed sensible given we'd just made an enemy of a teenager with connections and a persecution complex. As we turned off the lights, I couldn't shake Tyler's parting words. He'd make sure our family paid. But I pushed it aside, focusing on getting through the night. Tomorrow we'd take the next step. Tomorrow we'd face the delightful bureaucracy of the American legal system. By morning, I was at the Albuquerque police station. Amber by my side, clutching my hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become frighteningly unstable. I handed over the screenshots of Tyler's texts and Cynthia's photos of Amber's bruises to Officer Karen Davis, a stern woman who looked like she'd seen enough domestic abuse cases to write several depressing books. I explained how Tyler had been hurting Amber for months. She jotted notes, her eyes narrowing at the images of finger marks on Amber's wrists with the recognition of someone who knows precisely what they're looking at. I insisted we needed help now, before Tyler came back with whatever delightful revenge plan he was undoubtedly concocting. Karen promised to send a patrol to watch our street and told us to get Amber's injuries checked at the hospital. Because apparently, We weren't quite finished with the institutional tour of trauma documentation. We drove straight to Presbyterian Hospital, the desert sun glaring through the windshield like it was personally offended by our predicament. Amber was quiet, staring out the window in that 1,000-yard stairway people do when they're processing trauma. In the exam room, a doctor measured the bruises on her ribs and arms, face grim as she documented each mark with professional detachment that probably helps her sleep at night. A nurse snapped photos, noting dates for evidence, building a case, creating a paper trail, turning my daughter's body into an exhibit. Amber flinched when they asked how long it had been happening. She whispered, "It started small, grabs during fights, but got worse over months. Textbook escalation. Classic abuse pattern. Entirely preventable if literally anyone had noticed sooner." The doctor confirmed it was abuse, recommending a counselor. I nodded, holding Amber's hand tighter, my throat burning with regret for not noticing sooner. Parent of the Year material, clearly. Back home, Aaron Wallace, our neighbor with the flower shop and apparently a side hustle in neighborhood surveillance, knocked on our door. She'd seen Tyler's truck speeding off last night and heard rumors at the high school about his temper. Because teenagers can't keep secrets to save their lives, which in this case was actually helpful. Aaron mentioned catching him yelling at Amber behind the gym once. His hands too rough. Another witness. Another piece of evidence. Another person who'd noticed and done precisely nothing until now. I thanked her, scribbling her account for the police. She hugged Amber, promising to check in later, which was lovely, but also where were all these concerned citizens 6 months ago? As Aaron left, Dorothy showed up unannounced, because apparently, we were hosting an open house for family members with terrible timing. Her face was pale, eyes red like she'd been crying for England. She begged me to forgive Cynthia, saying she'd only been trying to protect Amber. Protect Amber by committing assault and battery with hairdressing equipment. Brilliant logic. I cut her off, asking why she'd called me that name at the party. Bastard child. Such a delightful term of endearment. Dorothy hesitated, then admitted Cynthia was her daughter from another man before she married my dad. The words hit like a lorry I hadn't seen coming despite all the warning signs. I'd grown up thinking we were full sisters. Turns out we were half-sisters, and apparently that explained everything. Spoiler, it explained nothing. Dorothy claimed Cynthia acted out of love, shaving Amber's head to keep her safe from Tyler. Because nothing says, "I love you," quite like forced hair removal without consent. She pleaded for me to drop the police report, saying it had ruined Cynthia's life. She just lost her job at the mall. Consequences for actions. How novel. How unexpected. How utterly deserved. I shook my head, voice steady despite wanting to scream. Cynthia's choices weren't my burden, and Amber's safety came first. Dorothy's eyes flashed with anger, because how dare I prioritize my daughter's well-being over her daughter's employment prospects? She stormed out, muttering about fixing this herself. Fixing it. As though this situation could be fixed with anything short of time travel and better life choices. I locked the door, hands shaking from the weight of her secret. Not just the sister revelation, though that was quite enough, thank you, but the sheer audacity of expecting forgiveness for assault because the motive was allegedly noble. Anthony came home from the bank, tie loose, looking like he'd had precisely the kind of day one has when their family is imploding. I told him about Dorothy's visit and the hospital report. He cursed under his breath, saying we should have acted sooner. Yes, Anthony. Thank you for that helpful retrospective analysis. I showed him Aaron's notes, adding them to our file, which was rapidly becoming the size of a Victorian novel. Later, I rang Karen Davis to update her with Aaron's story. She said they'd interviewed a teacher who'd seen Tyler corner Amber at school. The pieces were coming together, but I felt no relief. Just that gnawing dread that comes from realizing how close your daughter came to something considerably worse. Amber was in her room sketching to calm down. Art therapy without the therapist. I sat with her, promising we'd get through this with the confidence of someone who had no idea if we'd actually get through this. She asked if Cynthia would get in trouble. I said we'd let the police decide, which was the diplomatic answer when the real answer was, I genuinely hope so. That night I checked the locks twice. Tyler's threats echoing in my head like a particularly vindictive playlist I couldn't skip. I emailed the hospital photos to Karen, ensuring our evidence was airtight. Amber fell asleep with her sketchbook open, and I tucked her in, vowing to keep her safe no matter what. Maternal instincts, apparently, activate most strongly after you've already failed. A few days later, Karen Davis rang from the Albuquerque police station with news that turned my stomach into an exceptionally anxious pretzel. They'd searched Tyler's truck and found a small bag of pills hidden under the passenger seat. Karen said they were testing them but suspected they were meant to harm Amber at a party he'd planned. Pills. Party. A plan to incapacitate my daughter. This just kept getting more delightful by the minute. Tyler was arrested that afternoon, hauled out of his house in handcuffs whilst neighbors watched with the enthusiasm of people who'd been waiting for this drama for months. I exhaled, gripping the phone. But the relief was short-lived, because nothing in this story stays positive for longer than 30 seconds. That evening, Ronald Reed, Tyler's father and apparently a lawyer with all the charm of a particularly aggressive cactus, rang our house. His voice was sharp with that lawyer's tone that makes you want to punch something soft. He threatened to sue us for defamation and assault if we didn't drop the case. He claimed Anthony's car park stunt gave them leverage to ruin us. Because apparently, defending your daughter makes you the villain in their twisted narrative. Anthony overheard, face tense, muttering that Ronald's law firm had crushed bigger families than ours. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Because what we needed was more threats. I told Ronald we had proof. Texts, photos, hospital reports. The kind of evidence that doesn't care about your law degree. He laughed, saying no judge would take a teenager's word over his son's. The confidence of mediocre white men never ceases to amaze me. I hung up, pulse racing, and added his call to our evidence log. Because if we were going down, we were taking detailed notes on the way. The next morning, Linda Carter from Child Protective Services arrived at our door for a routine check. Because apparently when you report abuse, they check if you're abusing your child. The logic is impeccable. She interviewed Amber in her room, asking if she felt safe at home. Amber nodded, clutching a pillow, and explained how we were protecting her from Tyler. Linda spoke to Anthony and me in the kitchen, flipping through her clipboard with bureaucratic efficiency. She reviewed the police report and hospital photos, then said our home was stable but urged us to get Amber counseling. I agreed, scheduling a session for that week because apparently, our to-do list wasn't quite full enough. As Linda left, Amber came downstairs, eyes red. She said kids at school were whispering about her. Tyler's friends had started rumors, calling her a liar who faked her bruises for attention. Because victim blaming is apparently compulsory curriculum in American high schools. One of them, a kid named Jake, because of course he was involved, slipped a note into her locker saying Tyler just wanted to talk and fix things. Amber tore it up but came home shaking. I photographed the note scraps and emailed them to Karen. She replied quickly, saying they'd add it to Tyler's file as harassment. I drove Amber to school the next day, noticing kids staring as we pulled into the car park. A girl from her class muttered something as Amber passed, loud enough for me to hear, calling her a drama queen. Teenagers. Delightful creatures. Absolutely no empathy whatsoever. I walked Amber to the counselor's office where Diane Torres promised to monitor the hallways. Diane said she'd heard other students complain about Tyler's crew before, and the school was taking it seriously. Taking it seriously now. Not 6 months ago when it would have been useful, but now. Back home, Anthony was on edge, checking his phone for updates from Karen. He worried Ronald's threats could backfire, especially with that video of him grabbing Tyler. I reminded him our evidence was stronger. Amber's bruises, the texts, Aaron's account. Facts over feelings, evidence over threats. Karen rang again, saying they'd confirmed the pills were sedatives, illegal for Tyler to possess. She tracked down Jake, who admitted Tyler asked him to spike drinks at a party. Jake was scared, spilling everything to avoid trouble himself. Rats fleeing the sinking ship. How predictable. I felt a chill realizing how close Amber had come to danger. How close we'd come to planning a very different kind of hospital visit. Anthony suggested we change Amber's phone number to stop Tyler's friends texting her. I rang the provider immediately, setting it up with the efficiency of someone who'd had quite enough of teenage harassment for one lifetime. Amber spent the evening sketching in her room, avoiding social media where rumors spread like particularly aggressive mold. I sat with her, listening as she described feeling like everyone was against her. I promised we'd fight this together, which was either inspiring or delusional, depending on your perspective. Cynthia rang once, asking if Amber was okay, but I kept it short. Her role in this mess still stung like a particularly vindictive bee, and I wasn't ready to talk. Dorothy sent a text begging again to drop the charges, claiming Cynthia was falling apart without work. I deleted it, focusing on Amber's safety rather than Cynthia's employment woes. Erin stopped by with a bouquet from her shop, saying the neighborhood was buzzing about Tyler's arrest. She'd heard his family was losing clients at Ronald's firm. People didn't trust them anymore. Consequences. What a novel concept. I thanked her, adding her gossip to our notes, because apparently, neighborhood rumors count as intelligence gathering now. As weeks passed, Karen built her case, warning us Ronald was pulling strings to delay the hearing. I kept Amber close, driving her to school and back, watching for Tyler's friends like some sort of paranoid chauffeur. Every night I checked her windows, the desert air heavy with tension. We were holding strong, but the fight was far from over. 2 months later, we sat in the Albuquerque courtroom. The air was thick with tension and the smell of institutional cleaning products. Amber gripped my hand under the table, face pale but determined, looking like someone who decided to be brave even though every instinct screamed to run. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen enough nonsense to last several lifetimes, called the case. Karen Davis stood with the prosecutor, presenting our evidence with the efficiency of someone who does this far too often. Hospital photos, Tyler's texts, Erin's statement, Jake's confession about the party plan. Ronald Reed, in a slick suit that probably cost more than our car, leaned close to Tyler, whispering strategies. His legal team tried to paint Tyler as a misunderstood teen, because violent sociopaths are just misunderstood, apparently, claiming Amber's injuries were from sports and the texts were just playful banter. Playful banter. But because threatening someone is peak comedy. I clenched my fists, biting back several responses that wouldn't have helped our case but would have felt tremendously satisfying. The prosecutor called Amber to the stand. She walked up, voice steady despite trembling hands, describing how Tyler controlled her life, dictating her clothes, isolating her from friends, grabbing her hard enough to leave marks. She recounted an incident at a school dance where he'd pinned her against a wall, hissing threats if she talked to other boys. The courtroom went silent, jurors leaning forward like they'd suddenly remembered they were meant to be paying attention. Amber's eyes met mine and I nodded, urging her to keep going. Keep telling the truth. Keep being braver than any 18-year-old should have to be. Next, Cynthia took the stand, posture stiff like someone who knew they were also potentially in trouble. She admitted shaving Amber's head, explaining she'd overheard Tyler's plan to harm her at a party. Then she played a video she'd recorded secretly, a shaky clip of Tyler bragging to Jake about spiking Amber's drink to keep her quiet. The jurors' faces hardened. One woman shook her head with the kind of disgust usually reserved for stepping in something unpleasant. Ronald objected, naturally, arguing the video was inadmissible, but the judge overruled, saying it was recorded in a public park with no expectation of privacy. Tyler's smirk faded like cheap paint in sunlight, hands fidgeting. The confidence was evaporating rather spectacularly. The prosecutor brought up the pills found in Tyler's truck, confirmed as sedatives meant to incapacitate. Karen testified about Jake's statement, sealing Tyler's intent with all the finality of a tomb closing. Ronald's team scrambled, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. pills, planning, recorded confessions. But sure, let's call it a misunderstanding. Their argument sounded hollow even to them. The judge called a recess, and I hugged Amber outside, telling her she was brave. Braver than I'd been at 18. Braver than most adults I knew. Anthony joined us, eyes red but proud. Cynthia lingered nearby, trying to catch my eye. I ignored her, still raw from her actions and Dorothy's betrayal. Forgiveness takes time, and I hadn't scheduled any for the foreseeable future. Back in the courtroom, the jury returned after 3 hours. The foreman stood, voice clear enough to cut through the tension. Guilty on charges of assault, conspiracy to harm, and possession of illegal substances. Tyler's shoulders slumped like someone had cut his strings. Ronald's face turned red enough to flag down aircraft as he whispered furiously to his lawyers. The judge set sentencing for the following week, warning Tyler to expect jail time. Music to my ears. As we left, Ronald cornered us in the hallway, voice low and venomous like a particularly aggressive snake. He vowed to appeal, claiming we'd regret dragging his family's name through the mud. Their family's name. As though reputation mattered more than his son being a convicted abuser. I stared him down, saying our evidence spoke louder than his threats. He stormed off, leaving Tyler alone, head bowed, looking like someone who'd finally realized actions have consequences. Outside, Dorothy was waiting by our car, hands wringing like she was auditioning for a Victorian melodrama. She begged me to talk, to forgive Cynthia for what she did out of love. Love. That word again. Apparently, love justifies assault now. I cut her off, voice cold enough to frost glass. Their secrets and excuses had cost us enough. Cynthia stood behind her, silent, eyes downcast. I told them both I was done. No more family ties. No more chances. No more pretending everything was fine when it categorically wasn't. Amber squeezed my arm, nodding in agreement. We walked away, leaving them standing in the courthouse car park like forgotten props from a depressing play. Anthony drove us home, the desert stretching wide around us like it was trying to offer perspective. Amber leaned against me in the back seat, whispering, "Thanks for standing by me." I kissed her forehead, promising we'd rebuild together. Build something better. Build something that didn't involve assault disguised as protection or secrets disguised as love. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the case file closed. Tyler's conviction felt like a weight lifted. Several tons of weight, specifically. But Dorothy and Cynthia's pleas echoed in my mind like particularly persistent ghosts. I pushed them aside, knowing my choice was right. Amber deserved a fresh start, and so did I. We'd face the next steps without their baggage weighing us down. A week after the trial, Tyler was sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention with 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling. Karen rang to say he'd already caused trouble, picking fights with smaller kids in the facility. Just like he'd done with Amber. Patterns, apparently, are difficult to break, especially when you're a sociopath with poor impulse control. His family's name carried no weight there, and Ronald's appeals failed. The judge cited Tyler's pattern of aggression in Albuquerque, which was legal speak for, "Your son is a menace and we're not letting him out early." Word spread fast. Ronald's law firm took a hit. Clients pulled out, unwilling to trust a man whose son was a convicted abuser. Aaron texted me updates saying neighbors avoided their family, whispering about the scandal like it was the most entertaining thing to happen in their suburb for years. I didn't care about their downfall. Schadenfreude is unbecoming, they say, but sometimes it's all you've got. My focus was Amber. She started therapy at a local clinic, meeting Laura Perez twice a week. Laura helped her unpack the fear Tyler had instilled, teaching her to recognize red flags in relationships. All the things we should have taught her before but didn't because we assumed teenage relationships were harmless. Amber opened up slowly, admitting she'd felt trapped for months, blaming herself for his anger. Classic victim mentality. Classic abuse dynamic. Entirely predictable and entirely heartbreaking. I sat in on family sessions, learning to listen without pushing. Anthony joined too, leaving work early to be there, something he'd never done before. Apparently, near disasters make excellent motivators for behavioral change. Amber's confidence grew. She joined the school art club, her sketches turning bolder, filled with desert colors and angry cacti that probably represented something therapeutic. I framed one of her drawings, a cactus under a blazing sun, and hung it in our living room as a reminder that survivors can create beauty. Dorothy and Cynthia, though, became ghosts in our lives. Erin mentioned Cynthia lost her flat after her job at the mall ended, moving in with Dorothy in a cramped rental on the edge of town. Neighbors stopped inviting them to barbecues, their reputation stained by the trial's fallout. Consequences once again for actions. Revolutionary concept. Dorothy sent one last letter, handwriting shaky, begging for a chance to explain. She claimed Cynthia's act saved Amber. That I owed them forgiveness. Owed them. As though forgiveness is currency you can demand after committing assault. I tore it up, tossing it in the bin where it belonged. Their secret, Cynthia's parentage, their lies, had broken us beyond repair. Some things can't be fixed with apologies and explanations. Some bridges are better burned. I blocked their numbers, cutting them off for good. Amber asked about them once, voice soft. I told her we didn't need people who hurt us, even if they were family. Especially if they were family. She nodded, understanding more than I expected. Children are remarkably resilient when you give them permission to be. Anthony and I focused on rebuilding our home. We started weekly dinners, just the three of us, talking about school or work over plates of enchiladas. Normal conversation. Normal family dynamics. Novel concept. Amber laughed more, her smile returning like a guest who'd been away too long. I took on extra tutoring jobs at the elementary school, saving a few $100 a month to cover therapy costs. Apparently, healing costs money. Who knew? One evening, Erin invited us to her flower shop's anniversary party. Amber mingled with neighbors, her short hair now styled in a pixie cut she loved. She told me it reminded her she'd survived, thanks to us standing firm. No thanks to Cynthia's scissors, but we weren't dwelling on that. I watched her chat with a new friend, a girl from art club, and felt a surge of pride. My daughter. Survivor. Artist. Stronger than she had any right to be at 18. My own life shifted too. I joined a book club at the local library, meeting women who shared stories of cutting toxic ties. Their support grounded me, reminding me I wasn't alone in prioritizing sanity over family obligation. One night, Amber showed me a flyer for a teen advocacy group at her school, focused on dating abuse awareness. She wanted to speak at their first event, to help others spot warning signs like she hadn't. I hugged her, saying she was stronger than she knew. Turning trauma into advocacy. How very evolved of her. How very making lemonade from lemons, whilst the lemons were actually poisonous snakes disguised as citrus fruit. Anthony backed her up, offering to drive her to meetings. Supportive father, finally stepping up after the crisis had already happened. Better late than never, I suppose, though never late, would have been considerably more helpful 6 months earlier. As months passed, our house felt lighter, free from the weight of Dorothy and Cynthia's drama. No more surprise visits. No more tearful phone calls begging for forgiveness. No more secrets exploding like landmines at family gatherings. Just blessed, glorious peace, punctuated only by normal family dysfunction like arguing over whose turn it was to do the washing up. I stood in our back garden one evening, the desert breeze cool against my skin, carrying that particular scent of sand and survivor's relief. Amber was inside, sketching at the kitchen table, her laughter drifting out like the most beautiful sound I'd heard in months. That genuine laugh, not the forced one she'd perfected whilst dating Tyler. Not the scared one from the trial. Just laughter. Normal teenage, slightly inappropriate laughter at something on her phone. I'd built a life for us. Well, rebuilt it. From the smoking ruins of what came before. A life where trust and safety came first, where boundaries weren't merely decorative suggestions, where family meant something more substantial than shared DNA and enforced loyalty. The lesson was a hard one, the kind that leaves bruises on your soul long after the physical ones fade. Family isn't about blood, as it turns out. It's not about obligation or guilt or maintaining appearances at Christmas dinner whilst pretending everything's fine. It's about who stands by you when everything's falling apart, who shows up when it counts, who chooses you repeatedly, consciously, deliberately. Cutting off those who hurt us wasn't betrayal, despite what Dorothy's letters claimed. It wasn't cruelty, though she'd certainly framed it that way in her increasingly desperate messages before I blocked her. It was survival, self-preservation, setting boundaries and actually enforcing them for once in my pathologically accommodating life. See, I'd spent years being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over arguments, who made excuses for bad behavior, who prioritized family harmony over literally everything else, including apparently my daughter's safety. I'd been so busy maintaining relationships that I'd failed to notice when those relationships had become actively harmful. Cynthia had assaulted my daughter. Let's not dress it up with pretty language about protection and good intentions. She'd held her down and forcibly cut off her hair without consent. That's assault. That's battery. That's trauma dressed up as love. And I was done pretending otherwise. Dorothy had kept secrets for decades. About Cynthia's parentage, about her own infidelity, about the entire foundation our family was supposedly built on. Lies of omission are still lies, and I was done being complicit in maintaining comfortable fictions. Tyler had systematically abused my daughter for months, and I'd missed it. We'd both missed it, Anthony and I, too wrapped up in our own lives to notice the warning signs that were apparently visible to everyone from Cynthia to Aaron to random teachers at school. That failure would haunt me for years, probably. Definitely. But dwelling on it wouldn't help Amber heal. What would help was this: choosing her. Every single day. Choosing safety over family politics. Choosing healing over maintaining appearances. Choosing to believe her, support her, fight for her, even when it meant losing other relationships I'd once valued. Ronald Reed's law firm eventually closed its Albuquerque office. Not immediately, these things take time, but the clients kept leaving, the reputation kept deteriorating, and eventually the maths didn't work. I heard through Aaron, who heard through someone else, that they'd relocated to Texas. Fresh start. New victims. How lovely for them. Tyler served his full sentence, surprisingly. No early release for good behavior because apparently he couldn't manage good behavior even in juvenile detention. Some people are just committed to being terrible, and Tyler was clearly dedicated to his craft. When he was released, we'd already moved. Not far, still in Albuquerque because Amber had friends and therapy and her art club, but far enough that he'd have to work to find us. New house, new locks, new phone numbers. Fresh start without the toxic family members. Amber graduated high school with honors, which seemed almost anticlimactic after everything else. She got into a good university, art program naturally, with scholarships covering most of the costs. She wanted to stay close to home for the first year, make sure I was okay, which was touching but also slightly devastating because children shouldn't have to parent their parents. I told her to go wherever she wanted. That I'd be fine. That she'd earned the right to chase her dreams without worrying about me. She chose a university 2 hours away. Close enough to visit, far enough to have independence. Perfect compromise. The day we moved her into halls, she cried. Cried. Anthony pretended he wasn't crying but absolutely was. Normal parent emotions for normal parent milestones, except nothing about getting here had been normal. Thank you, she said, hugging me in her new room that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. For believing me. For fighting for me. For choosing me over them. Always, I promised, meaning it with every cell in my body. Always you. As we drove home, just Anthony and me, the back seat conspicuously empty, I thought about Dorothy and Cynthia. Wondered if they ever thought about us. If they'd learned anything. If they understood why I'd cut them off, or if they still believed themselves to be the victims in this scenario. Probably the latter. People like that rarely develop self-awareness, in my experience. They're too busy rewriting history to make themselves the heroes, too invested in their own narratives to acknowledge the harm they've caused. I didn't miss them. That was the surprising part. How little I missed them. I'd expected grief, perhaps. Complicated feelings about severing family ties. But mostly I just felt lighter, freer. Like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for years and someone had finally given me permission to put it down. Erin became something of a surrogate family member. She'd pop round for tea, bring flowers from her shop, check in on how we were managing the empty nest. Her friendship, freely given without obligation or guilt, meant more than any blood relationship ever had. The book club women rallied round as well. We'd meet weekly, discussing novels but mostly discussing life. They'd been through their own dramas, toxic families, abusive relationships, catastrophic betrayals. We were a support group disguised as literary criticism, and it was exactly what I needed. Anthony and I had to rebuild our marriage too, if I'm honest. Not because it was broken precisely, but because we'd been so focused on Amber that we'd forgotten to focus on each other. We started date nights. Actual date nights, where we talked about things other than court cases and therapy appointments and whether our daughter was healing properly. We talked about our failures. How we'd missed the signs. How we'd been so concerned with being cool parents, who gave Amber space that we'd given her too much space. How we'd trusted too readily, assumed too quickly, believed too naively that teenage relationships were innocent. "We can't change the past," Anthony said one evening, over margaritas at our favorite Mexican restaurant. "But we can do better next time." "Next time?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are we planning another teenager?" He laughed. "God, no. But when Amber has kids, when we're grandparents, we'll do better. We'll know what to look for." It was a nice thought. Redemption through grandchildren. Except it was also depressing because it meant living with the knowledge of our failures until such time as we could hypothetically try again. "We did the best we could with what we knew," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Did we though?" he asked, and there was no accusation in his voice. Just genuine questioning. Because a lot of people noticed. Cynthia noticed. Erin noticed. Teachers noticed. Were we just willfully blind? That question haunted me. Still haunts me if I'm honest. Were we neglectful parents, too wrapped up in our own lives to see what was happening right in front of us? Or were we simply human, imperfect, doing our best in an impossible situation where teenage girls hide things and abusive boys are excellent at manipulation? Probably both. Definitely both. The uncomfortable truth that parenting books don't tell you is that you can do everything right and still fail spectacularly. You can be attentive and loving and present, and your child can still get hurt. The world is full of Tyler Reeds, and no amount of good parenting can completely protect your children from them. What you can do, what we did, is show up when it matters. Believe them when they tell you. Fight for them when they need fighting for. Choose them over everyone else, including family members who claim they were only trying to help. Amber thrived at university. Her artwork got darker for a while. Lots of imagery about cages and chains and breaking free, before gradually lightening into something more hopeful. She had a show in her second year, and Anthony and I drove up to see it. The entire exhibition was about survival, about healing, about reclaiming agency after abuse. It was devastating and beautiful, and I cried in front of strangers who probably thought I was having some sort of emotional breakdown. Which, to be fair, I was. But it was a good breakdown. Proud breakdown. My daughter is talented and resilient and turning her trauma into art breakdown. She's dating now. Someone gentle, respectful, who asks permission before touching her and respects her boundaries without making it weird. Someone who makes her laugh. Someone who brought us flowers when he came for dinner. Someone so thoroughly opposite to Tyler that it's almost comical. Is this one acceptable? Amber asked me quietly in the kitchen whilst he chatted with Anthony in the living room. Does he make you happy? Yes. Yes. Does he respect you? Yes. Has he ever made you feel scared or uncomfortable? No. Never. Then yes, I said. He's acceptable. More than acceptable. She hugged me, and I realized this was what healing looked like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet progress, small victories, normal relationship milestones that felt monumental after everything we'd been through. Years later, because this story doesn't end neatly, life rarely does, I ran into Dorothy at the supermarket. It was inevitable, really. Albuquerque isn't that large. We'd managed to avoid each other for years, but eventually, the universe decided we needed to have an uncomfortable confrontation in the tinned goods aisle. She looked older, tired. Her trolley was half empty, containing only essentials. She saw me, froze, then seemed to gather her courage. "Barbara," she said, like my name was a prayer or a curse. "How are you?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You?" "Managing." She hesitated. "How's Amber?" And there it was. The question she'd forfeited the right to ask when she'd chosen Cynthia's employment over Amber's trauma. When she'd begged me to drop charges. When she'd called me a bastard child at my daughter's birthday party. "She's well," I said, because I wasn't going to elaborate. Wasn't going to share details of Amber's life with someone who'd lost visitation rights to that information. Dorothy nodded, eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know you won't forgive me, but I'm sorry." An apology. Years too late. Delivered in the most mundane setting imaginable. Felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. No grief. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where family feeling used to be. "Okay," I said, because what else was there to say? I didn't forgive her. I didn't not forgive her. I simply didn't care enough to have feelings about it anymore. I walked away, leaving her standing there, and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt. No regret. No second-guessing. Just the satisfaction of someone who'd made difficult choices and refused to apologize for them. Anthony asked if I was okay when I got home. Noticed I was quieter than usual. I told him about the encounter. He waited for me to process, knowing by now that I needed space to figure out my feelings before discussing them. "Do you think we did the right thing?" asked eventually, cutting them off completely. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "They hurt our daughter. They prioritized their own agenda over her safety. That's not forgivable." But Dorothy apologized. Dorothy apologized years too late in a supermarket, because she ran into you accidentally. That's not a real apology. That's guilt management. He was right, of course. Real apologies come with changed behavior. Real apologies don't come with excuses or justifications or pleas to overlook consequences. Real apologies acknowledge harm and take responsibility and don't demand forgiveness in return. Dorothy and Cynthia never understood that. They believed love excused everything. That family obligation trumped personal boundaries. That their intentions mattered more than their impact. They were wrong. Spectacularly, devastatingly wrong. And I'd stopped trying to explain that to them years ago because you can't teach empathy to people who fundamentally don't believe they did anything wrong. So here we are. Years later. Amber's thriving. Anthony and I are solid. We've built a chosen family of friends and neighbors who show up consistently, who respect boundaries, who understand that love is demonstrated through actions, not just words. We still live in Albuquerque. Still deal with the desert heat and the occasional news about Ronald Reed's law firm. Still avoid certain parts of town where we might run into people we'd rather not see. But we're happy. Not perfectly happy. Perfection is a myth sold by self-help books and Instagram influencers. But genuinely, messily, imperfectly happy in the way real people are when they've survived something terrible and come out the other side mostly intact. The scars remain. Amber still has moments where she dissociates, where some random trigger sends her spiraling back to those months with Tyler. I still have guilt about missing the signs, about failing to protect her when she needed protecting. Anthony still worries about that video, even though Tyler's in prison and Ronald's reputation is ruined. But scars are proof of survival. Evidence that something tried to destroy you and failed. Battle wounds that tell a story about strength and resilience and refusing to let terrible people win. And we didn't let them win. That's the point of this entire catastrophic saga. Tyler's in prison. Ronald's firm is diminished. Dorothy and Cynthia are estranged. We're not. We're here. We're together. We're functioning. We won, if you can call any of this winning. More accurately, we survived. We chose each other. We rebuilt. We refused to let other people's dysfunction become our destiny. That's not a Hollywood ending. There's no dramatic reconciliation. No forgiveness montage. No tearful reunion where everyone acknowledges their mistakes and promises to do better. Real life rarely provides those satisfying narrative closures. What we got instead was this: peace, boundaries, distance from toxic people, a daughter who's healing, a marriage that's stronger, a life that's genuinely ours, not dictated by family obligation or guilt or maintaining appearances. Was it worth it? The pain, the trauma, the court cases, the severed relationships. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Because I can't see the alternative timeline where we stayed silent, where Amber continued dating Tyler, where something worse happened at that party he'd planned. But I do know this. Given the same circumstances, I'd make the same choices. I'd slap Cynthia again. Cut off Dorothy again. I'd stand in that courtroom and watch Tyler be convicted again. Because protecting my daughter isn't negotiable. Her safety trumps everything else. Family peace, social harmony, my mother's feelings, my sister's employment. Everything. That's the lesson, if there is one. And I say, if, because sometimes terrible things happen without convenient moral lessons attached. Sometimes life is just chaos and pain and doing your best with incomplete information and hoping you don't screw up too badly. But if there's a lesson, it's this. Choose your child. Always. Choose them over everyone else, including family members you've known your entire life. Choose them even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Choose them when well-meaning relatives assault them whilst claiming protection. Choose them when powerful families threaten lawsuits. Choose them when schools gossip and neighbors judge and people you trusted reveal themselves to be spectacularly unreliable. Choose them. Fight for them. Believe them. Stand with them even when everyone else walks away. Because that's what family actually means. Not shared DNA. Not obligation. Not tradition or loyalty or any of those abstract concepts people invoke when they want you to tolerate mistreatment. Family is who shows up, who stays, who chooses you repeatedly, consciously, deliberately, even when it costs them something. And Amber and Anthony and I, we chose each other. We're still choosing each other. Every single day. Through therapy appointments and university visits and uncomfortable supermarket encounters and all the messy, complicated, imperfect moments that make up actual life. That's my story. That's our story. It's not pretty. It's not neat. It doesn't wrap up with a bow and a moral that makes you feel good about humanity. But it's real. It's honest. It's what happened when family drama stopped being petty arguments over holiday plans and became something considerably more catastrophic. And we survived it. Scarred certainly. Changed definitely. But intact. Together. Stronger than we were when this all started. So if you're facing something similar, if your family is imploding, if you're having to choose between toxic relatives and your child's safety, if you're wondering whether cutting people off makes you the villain, let me save you some time. It doesn't. Protecting your child doesn't make you cruel. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. Choosing safety over family harmony doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you a parent. Good one. The kind who shows up when it matters. And that's worth more than any reconciliation, any forgiveness, any maintained relationship with people who hurt the ones you love. Choose your child. Always. Even when it costs you everything else. Especially when it costs you everything else. Because they're worth it. They're always worth it. And years from now, when they're thriving despite everything, when they're turning their trauma into art or advocacy or simply living their best life, you'll know you made the right choice. Even if nobody else understands. Even if you lose every other relationship in the process. Even if you're the villain in someone else's story. You'll know. And that's enough. That has to be enough. It was enough for us.